Hello again, guys. Today we're going to look at solving equations, which you should remember how to do. We've done it before. You can always review those videos because I'm going to briefly review how to solve them. The only difference is now we're going to be looking at solving equations that have the decimals in them. So we're basically applying all the rules that we've learned. We're going to be using positive and negative decimals, so we'll have to remember our rules for integers as well as how to solve equations. So again, you'll notice I've given you your two important rules that I'm trying to pound into your heads. The two things we need to know when we're solving equations. We need to keep our equation balanced. That equal sign is my balance scale. I can do anything I want to one side as long as I do the exact same to the other. Then I'm trying to isolate my variable. Once I have my variable by itself, I know what it's equal to. The other thing we want to remember is that we are using inverse operations here. We want to undo what's being done to the variable. That's how we're going to get it by itself. So we're going to take a look at a few examples here. And again, if you wanted a more detailed how to solve equations, go back and rewatch the original equation videos. Here I'm just going to briefly review it, and we're going to go into it. So here, the first thing I do is I look at my variable, what operation is happening, addition. I'm going to undo that by subtracting. What am I subtracting? The number I see, which is negative 11.64. And you'll recall, when we're subtracting, we rewrite it as adding the additive inverse. So ideally, it's the same thing as saying I'm going to add 11.64. Then what you'll notice is over here, I've got a negative 6.69 plus a positive, which means I have opposite signs, which means I'm going to wind up subtracting their absolute values. So I'm just going to do my math over here on the side. So I'm going to subtract the smaller from the larger absolute value. I wind up with 4.68. And I want to go back. I want to look at my original numbers. 11 has a greater absolute value. That was positive, so this should remain positive. Over here, those canceled out, and I was left with x. X is equal to 4.68. How can I go back and check and make sure I'm right? Well, I can plug this in and evaluate. So I can say 4.68 plus negative 11.64 is equal to negative 6.96. When I do this addition, what I should wind up with is negative 6.96, and indeed I do, so I know that it checks out. So remember, when we're doing equations, we can always go back and check and make sure that we're correct. Over on problem number 2, what you'll notice is I have a couple numbers over here. So remember, what I want to do is I want to combine my like terms first. This is nice and easy, luckily, because these are both positives, so it's just the regular addition that we've been doing. Sorry, that is one that was a very sloppy writing one. So I'm going to simplify this side simply by combining my two constants, my two numbers over here. Now I still have a one-step equation to solve. We're adding, so how am I going to undo that? I'm going to undo that by subtracting. You'll recall, when we subtract these, I've told you that we can add the additive inverse. That's how we're going to subtract. So now I have a negative plus a negative. If you'll recall, when our two signs are the same, what we're going to wind up doing is adding and keeping the sign. So I know my answer is going to be negative, and then I just have to add them. Keeping my decimal line, I wind up with negative 48.41. W is equal to, just move that a little closer. W is equal to negative 48.41. Over here, this canceled. And over here, we did our addition to get our answer. So we isolated our variable, we kept them balanced. All right, over here, you'll notice I have a number that I'm adding, I have a variable, and I have a number I'm subtracting. So the first thing I'm going to do is change my subtraction into addition by adding the additive inverse. It's just going to make it easier for me to figure out what I'm combining here. So now, what we know with addition is it doesn't matter what order I add them in. So even though these are not next to each other, I can take these two numbers and add them together. If you look at them, though, I'm adding a positive and a negative, which means I'm going to wind up subtracting their absolute values. I'm going to come down here. I'm going to subtract the smaller from the larger absolute value. 5, your decimal. When I subtract the 2, I wind up with 0.566, then I need to determine my sign. 0.624 is the larger number, the larger absolute value. It was positive, so this is positive. So I have x plus 0.566 is equal to 16.7. Sorry, I'm going to erase my work over here so I have room to write. Now I have an equation, a simple equation that I can solve. We're going to do that by keeping it balanced. I'm adding to my variable, which means to get it by itself, I need to subtract. I'm going to write this so that my numbers are lined up here. I'm going to give myself a little space here. I'm going to add my 0 placeholders here because since we're subtracting, I don't want to get confused. We have to remember to borrow and carry properly. So if I borrow from this, I get 10, then remember I have to borrow from that 10, which makes 9, carry this over here. 4, 3, 1, keep your decimal, 16. I wind up with 16.134 is equal to x. And again, remember, I can check that. I can take my x value, plug it back in, add those two numbers together, and make sure that it equals my original number, and I'll know that I'm correct. All right. Here, what you'll notice is we're subtracting the variable. So remember, when we have our variable in this second spot, my fact families tell me that I can flip-flop these two numbers and still have a true statement. So what we want to do to solve this is simply take 36.25, subtract negative 40.3, and that will give me my value for my variable d. Now remember, we're subtracting, so I'm going to add my additive inverse. Now I have 36.25 plus a positive 40.3. I'm just going to line those up so that I can add. Keep my decimal in the same place. And I find out that D is equal to 76.55. Okay. And again, we can plug it back in and we can check our work if we want to. All right. On this one here, you'll notice I have b minus a negative. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to rewrite my equation because I know that subtracting is the same as adding the additive inverse. So now I basically have b plus 80.77. Now it's a little easier to solve. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to subtract 80.77 since I did it to this side. Sorry, I kind of erased this number over here. Let me rewrite it so we can see it. I'm going to subtract it from this side as well to keep it balanced. So what you'll notice is I'm subtracting a smaller number from a larger number. Since that doesn't really work right, we're going to change it to adding our additive inverse. So remember, I'm adding opposite signs, which means I'm going to subtract the absolute values. Smaller from the larger. When I do that, I wind up with 32.2. Here, my larger value was 80, which was negative, so this is negative as well. So B is equal to negative 32.2. And again, we can go back, plug that into our original equation, and check it. And feel free to use calculators for checking your work, that's fine. Again, if you have any questions, you can go back, you can watch the other videos, the original videos about solving equations. Rewatch the video. Feel free to post your questions in the comment spot or email me. I'll answer those in class for you. Have a great night, guys.